The morning began with a pale gold light resting over the quiet neighborhood, and the world seemed to breathe in a slower rhythm, as if waiting for something gentle to unfold. Lena walked along the narrow sidewalk near her apartment, with a tired heaviness behind her steps, a weight she had carried for weeks without knowing how to put it down. She traced her fingertips along the cool metal fence beside her and tried to steady herself because her thoughts felt like scattered leaves in the wind. She had decisions to make that felt too big for her. A new job possibility had opened up in another city, and the idea of leaving everything familiar scared her more than she wanted to admit. She did not want to step into the wrong direction and lose something she was supposed to keep. She whispered inside her own heart that she needed guidance, something clear enough to reassure her and quiet enough to reach her in the noise of uncertainty. She turned toward the small community center where her church often gathered and noticed that the front door was slightly open. Warm light spilled out across the pavement, creating a soft path that seemed to invite her in. It felt almost like a place God might use to speak if she allowed herself to slow down long enough to hear. She hesitated, then stepped inside. The quiet room held a peaceful stillness, and the faint smell of old wooden pews mixed with freshly brewed coffee hung in the air. She breathed in deeply and settled into a seat near the middle of the room, feeling the worn fabric beneath her fingertips. She let her shoulders sink, as if the silence itself was heavy enough to hold her. A moment later, Pastor Malak stepped out from a side hallway holding a box of notebooks. His expression carried the same calm she had always known in him, a kind of peace that did not depend on circumstances. He set the box down gently and took a breath as if sensing that someone else was there. When his eyes landed on Lena, he simply nodded in recognition. He moved slowly toward the front of the room and settled into a chair as if he wanted to give her permission to rest without asking anything from her. She watched him for a moment, feeling a small warmth rise inside, as if his presence alone reminded her she did not have to figure everything out on her own. A soft rustle came from the back of the room and Eliza entered with small, steady steps. She carried a folded blanket over her arm and wore that familiar floral scarf loosely around her neck. She paused when she noticed Lena and smiled with a warmth that reached her eyes, a smile that always made Lena feel seen. Alyssa placed the blanket gently over a chair near the aisle and sat down with the slow, careful movements of someone who had lived long enough to know that nothing needed to be rushed. Her fingers traced the edges of her scarf as if she were remembering something that had once comforted her. Tom slipped in behind her wearing his usual hoodie, slightly oversized on his lean frame. He looked tired but alert, the kind of tired that came from pushing through too many responsibilities without giving himself space to breathe. He found a seat near the front and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees as if he hoped to catch something important before it faded. Lena glanced at him and recognized the same quiet searching she felt inside her. A gentle stillness settled over the room again. It was the kind of stillness that felt alive, almost sacred, like something unseen was preparing to speak. Pastor Malak breathed in slowly, allowing the silence to deepen, and he reached for the worn Bible resting on the small wooden table beside him. His fingers brushed over its surface with the familiarity of someone who had carried it through many seasons. He opened it to a passage marked by a slip of paper and read the words quietly to himself first, letting them rest in the air before giving them voice. Exodus 33-14. My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. Those words lingered in the room as if they carried their own weight and warmth, as if they were meant to settle deep into the places where fear had made a home. Lena felt something shift inside her, a slow, gentle stirring that brought a sense of being known. She closed her eyes for a moment and let the words settle in her chest. She thought about Moses standing before God, overwhelmed by the path ahead, unsure of the next step, yet desperate for direction. She imagined the desert landscape stretching far and wide, silent except for the wind, and the weight of leading others resting on his shoulders. She imagined Moses admitting that he could not go without God's presence, and God responding with words that promised more than a destination. They promised companionship. They promised peace. They promised that he would not walk alone. Lena felt something inside her soften as she imagined that moment. She felt the truth in the words quietly press against her own fear. She did not know the future or the right decision, but she sensed the gentle promise that God's presence could meet her even here in this ordinary room. In this uncertain moment, Tom shifted in his seat, crossing his arms loosely and looking up toward the light filtering through the high windows. His face held questions he did not dare speak, but they rested visibly in his eyes. He searched the ceiling as if it might offer something he had missed, some sign that would tell him which direction he should take with his life. He had been balancing 2 part-time jobs and trying to figure out whether he should return to school or stay where he was. He felt torn between loyalty to his family and the desire to pursue something more. He did not know how to choose without disappointing someone. Elissa folded her hands in her lap and closed her eyes for a moment. Her breathing was slow and steady, and she felt the verse settle into places inside her that had weathered many storms. She remembered seasons in her own life when she had begged God for clear direction and instead had received His presence. Not a map, not instructions, but an assurance that He would walk each step with her even when the path felt hidden. She had learned that guidance was not always about answers. Sometimes it was about trust. She lifted her head faintly, and her expression held a peace shaped by years of walking through unknown roads without being abandoned. Lena felt something inside her chest loosen as she watched Eliza, and she quietly wondered if she might ever reach that kind of steady faith. She wished she could absorb some of that peace through the air and let it settle deep within her. She looked again at the verse resting open on the table, and felt the edges of her uncertainty soften just enough to breathe. Pastor Malak remained still, allowing the room to rest in the quiet presence that seemed to wrap gently around them. He knew what it felt like to reach a crossroads and feel afraid of choosing wrong. He remembered seasons when he had struggled to trust that God was nearby, seasons when he carried burdens too heavy for one man. The words from Exodus had guided him through countless moments, and he sensed that they were meant to reach each person in the room in their own way. Lena pulled her knees slightly closer to her chest, as if the movement could help her hold on to the warmth beginning to rise inside her. She thought about the job opportunity again and the possibility of moving away from everything familiar. She imagined herself in a new city with new streets and new faces, and she wondered if God's presence could feel steady enough to carry her through the uncertainty. She felt the beginning of something hopeful but fragile, like a spark waiting to grow. Tom lowered his head into his hands and took a quiet breath. He felt tired of pretending he had everything under control. He wanted to believe that God was close enough to guide him, close enough to help him choose the right path. He let the weight of his worries settle onto the floor and imagined himself handing them over to someone stronger. Elissa opened her eyes and let them settle softly on the room. She felt gratitude rise inside her like a warm tide. She thought about all the years she had experienced, God's quiet companionship, and she prayed silently that Lena and Tom would learn the same steady trust. She hoped they would sense that guidance often arrived in the softness of God's presence, rather than in loud dramatic answers. The light in the room brightened as the sun lifted higher outside. The warmth pressed gently through the windows and settled on their faces like a soft reminder. Lena felt some of the heaviness behind her ribs begin to release as she thought again about the verse. She pictured God walking beside her on whatever road she took. She imagined His presence guiding her steps quietly but faithfully. She let the image sink in until it steadied her breathing. She looked around the room again. Pastor Malik sitting with calm strength, Elissa resting with quiet peace, Tom leaning forward as if listening for something within himself. In this small ordinary gathering she felt something holy unfold. Not because the room was special, but because God's presence had stepped into the quiet and brought rest where fear had tried to take over. She breathed deeply again. The air felt different now. Warmer, softer, almost like a gentle hand resting on her shoulder. She realized that maybe she did not need to know every detail of the future right away. Maybe guidance would come step by step. Maybe rest would arrive in the assurance that she was not walking alone. As she let this thought settle, something inside her shifted from fear to trust. It was not dramatic. It was not loud, but it was real enough to anchor her. And as she sat there, that shift grew into a quiet prayer rising from her heart. God, if you are leading me, help me to follow. If your presence goes with me, help me to rest. Help me trust that I am not stepping into the unknown alone. Amen. The warmth of the moment settled over her like a gentle blanket, and she felt ready to face the week ahead with a calmer heart. The verse remained in her mind like a soft echo, reminding her that guidance does not have to come through certainty. It comes through companionship, through presence, through the quiet assurance that God walks alongside her in every step she takes. And maybe that is the message for this week. That when you feel lost or uncertain or afraid to choose the wrong direction, you can rest in this truth. His presence goes with you. His guidance is steady. His peace is near. And you are not walking alone. If this touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder today. And remember, you never walk without him.